Okay, all right. So we are now going to switch our focus to Weber's arguments about bureaucracy and rationalization. So this seems a bit random. It seems pretty disconnected from the conversations we've already had about Weber. So we had a whole lecture in class about the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, and then I posted the other lecture looking at ideal types. And this isn't necessarily at the beginning going to seem like it's connected to either one of those things, but actually really, really is. And it's also going to seem really pointless and strange to be thinking a lot about bureaucracies and bureaucratic systems and why the hell are we thinking about this. But there are real implications of his argument here for our lives and the way we experience the world, and it's actually really pretty depressing. That actually gets at this particular aspect of Weber's personality that I kind of referenced a little bit in class the other day. But he's really super negative. This guy does not have a positive outlook about where we are headed as a species. He sees human history as headed towards a very dark place. And a big part of that reason is because of this process of bureaucracy and rationalization that we're essentially powerless against, but that it's really, it's really a very serious thing for him. So at the beginning, it's going to seem really disconnected, but hopefully, as we move forward, you'll see more connections to your own life. So here we're talking about ideal type bureaucracies. So again, ideal type doesn't necessarily mean that every bureaucratic system is going to fit exactly this structure, or it's going to have all of these features, but an ideal type would, and so most bureaucracies are going to be sort of similar to this, even though in the real world there's going to be deviations. It's not going to be perfect. So there are 6 main features of the ideal type bureaucracy. First is hierarchy. Second is strict division of labor. Third is management based on written documents. Then we have positions require training. Official activity should be the worker's focus, and jobs are governed by rules. So we're going to go through all of these one at a time. Then after we get through them, we're going to talk about the implications of bureaucratic systems and the degree to which they dominate our lives, and the positives and negatives associated with that. Okay, then we'll move on to rationalization. So first, the 6 features of the ideal type bureaucracy. So the first is the hierarchy. So if you hear the word bureaucracy, you probably think immediately hierarchy, where we have some kind of management structure like this, where there's somebody at the top of the system. If it's a corporation, it's the CEO. If it's the school, there's going to be a president. So here at Framingham State, we have Dr. Chevalios. I actually have no idea how to pronounce his name. I think that's how you say it. But he's at the top of the system. Again, a corporation, you have the CEO. Then we have, underneath the CEO, we'd have things like presidents. Underneath presidents, we would have people like vice presidents, and then department heads, all the way down to the workers. So if you're talking about Walmart, for instance, you'd have the CEO of Walmart, all the way down to divisional managers, regional managers, presidents, vice presidents. So it actually, let me say that again. So it'd be CEOs, presidents, vice presidents, department heads. So you have the head of accounting, the head of marketing, the head of all these different departments. Underneath them, there'd be lower levels of management, all the way down to the lowest level of workers, which if you're talking about the retail side of Walmart, it's going to be people like cashiers and people who are stocking the shelves. If we're talking about things like marketing, then the lowest level people are going to be people like graphic designers, that sort of stuff. But anyway, so as you start with these higher levels of power and authority, which are up top here, and then as we move down, we see lower levels of power and authority. Now, within this system, assignments flow downward. What that means is the people at the top of the system give assignments or tasks to people beneath them, then the people underneath them break those assignments up, pass them on to the people underneath them, all the way down until you get to the bottom of the system, where the frontline workers, like retail employees or people working on loading docks or whatever, are going to be carrying out the bulk of the work. That's not to say that people in between aren't doing work as well, but they're more managers. They're more handling other people rather than doing the basic functions of the organization, which is something like Walmart. It's actually selling things, right? So it's the frontline workers who are doing the bulk of the work, and then they're being managed by people above them. This idea that accountability flows upward, all that means is that each person is responsible to that person's own boss. So everyone is supposed to know exactly who his or her own boss is, and that person is supposed to essentially do the tasks that boss tells them to do. And then that boss has his or her own boss, who has his or her own boss, all the way up the chain. So assignments start up here and they move down through the system. And then in terms of accountability, each person is accountable to, has to answer to the person directly above him or her. Okay, so there's this hierarchical system. There's actually quite a bit more, though, to bureaucracies than just hierarchies. You can have hierarchical systems that are not bureaucratic systems. And that brings us to our second feature of bureaucracies, or these ideal type bureaucracies, and that's a strict division of labor. Now, we've talked about the division of labor before in terms of assembly lines, and assembly lines definitely fit well within the bureaucratic system. So if you remember our conversation with assembly line, we talked about how you have a bunch of different individuals, say, making cars, and rather than having each person on the assembly line make a car from start to finish, which would be slow and expensive, and you'd end up with really terrible cars, you had each person on the assembly line contributing one very small component of the work. So we see here, these look like car engines. They look like some kind of engine. And the car engines are traveling along this conveyor belt, and along the way, you have people doing things to the conveyor belts, or not conveyor belts, to the engines. So, for instance, you have the people back here. Maybe they're attaching some nut or bolt. Maybe they're checking a particular line or a hose or belt or something, or they're attaching something. Then they pass on to the next person who adds what they add. Next person adds what the next person adds, all the way down the line. Then we have people over here who look like managers or people who are maybe checking the quality of the work. But regardless, you have a whole bunch of people working at very small individual tasks, and together they end up producing these large, complicated products, in this case, a car engine. That is absolutely very much part of a bureaucratic system, and you see these types of assembly lines within bureaucracies. But there's more division of labor going on in bureaucratic systems than just on assembly lines. We also have people like office workers. So we have, imagine this person is an accountant. This person's working with receipts, working to manage the books. And this person's job is just to handle accounts. This person's job here is an operator. Quick little side note on the operators. I was looking for stock photos. That's where all these photos come from. Actually, so you can see right here, some of them have little watermarks and stuff. But all of the photos of operators are either people who are just filled with rage and hate screaming into a phone, or they're people with the biggest, most ridiculous smiles on their faces imaginable. I don't know what the deal is, but apparently those are images of operators. Either they hate everything, or they're insanely happy. It's really weird. So it took me a while to find someone who looked sort of normal. But anyway, so we have the accountant here. We have an operator here who's answering phone, maybe helping customers, maybe a telemarketer, whatever. But what happens in this division of labor is that this person over here, who's in the accounting department, does not, when the phones get busy over in the sales department, doesn't abandon her accounting work and run over to the sales department and pick up a phone. Her job up here as the accountant is to do accounting work, and that's all she does. It's not like the operators need help, so she comes in and helps the operators. If the loading dock down here needs help, she does not go walk down to the loading dock and start loading up boxes. That's not her job. Everyone does their own individual job, and that's all they're qualified to do. If you think about the university, for instance, I have had plenty of students come up to me and ask me questions about things like financial aid or how to register for classes, all these different things. And a lot of times I don't know the answer to those questions. So they'll ask me about financial aid, and I don't work in financial aid, so I don't know the rules. I can understand why people ask me, but our expertise is so split up that I don't know anything about how financial aid works. It would be helpful if I did, but I don't. So I always have to refer people to someone else. And there are times when students will ask me questions, and I don't know who to refer them to. And so I'll refer them to somebody who I think might be right or who I think might know. But then the student can go run off and talk to that person, and that person not only isn't the right person, but then doesn't know who to talk to. So you end up getting passed along. That kind of thing happens a lot when, for instance, you call Sears, or you call Best Buy, or you call one of these big companies, and you end up having a question, but there's no department that is set up to answer that question, so no operator can provide you with that information, because everyone has such narrow job duties that they can't answer questions about other types of jobs. So you call I've called technical support for Verizon, for instance, and then I had a question about my bill, and the technical support person can't answer that question, so they have to transfer me back to customer service, who then transfers me to billing, because no one knows anybody else's jobs, right? You have to talk to the right person. So it can be a frustrating feature of bureaucracies, but the strict division of labor is something that's really necessary to keep them functioning. Everyone needs to fill their role and do their particular job. So then we have management based on written documents, for what Weber refers to as the files. So the files are all the memos, communications, training manuals, applications, all the internal documents, and so on that fill up organizations, that the organizations run on. More and more, those types of written documents are not going to be written anymore. They're going to be electronic. So we're moving away from this, although there's still plenty of paper in bureaucratic systems now. If you think about the school, Framingham State, you'll see all kinds of documents, which we'll talk about in a second. But a lot of the material is becoming electronic, so it's being saved online and being processed and held online. But so if you think about this, there's a few reasons. One, there's so many things happening in any given bureaucracy. You have thousands and thousands of people oftentimes, sometimes tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands if we're thinking about things like governments. But you have all these different people operating in these systems. So we need written accounts of what's happening. So let's say you are applying for admission to Framingham State University. Well, you need to, one, fill out an application form. You need to get people to write recommendations for you. You need to fill out financial aid forms. To fill out those financial aid forms, you need to get other kinds of documentation, like documentation of income. You might have to get credit statements. I don't know. There's quite a bit that goes into that. Then you submit all of that material to the university. Those different pieces of the application get sent to different parts of the school. A lot of them probably get scanned, hopefully anyway, and get saved electronically. But they move throughout the system, and they get assessed by different people. So you might have different departments or different administrators looking at, for instance, the quality of the applicant to see if the university wants to admit the person. You have people in financial aid trying to figure out if the person's going to be able to pay their bill, or if the university can offer them money to come to the school for support, and so on. If you're applying and you want to play sports, there's even more going on there. But there's quite a bit. Oh, you also have to document things like health history and vaccinations, and that all goes to different departments as well. Well, we need all this paper, even though it's incredibly overwhelming and it seems crazy sometimes, because one, we need a way to track what's happening, right? So there's no one person who can remember all this information. So if I'm responsible, if I'm on the committee of people responsible for admitting students, I need to be able to have the physical application or the electronic version of the application that you filled out, so I can remember who you are when I'm going through these thousands of applications. Also, you have to remember that people at these organizations come and go. People work there for a while, and then they quit and they leave. Well, if I'm handling your application and then I quit, other people need to have records of what I have done. So they're going to have, the people who are replacing me will have the actual application that you filled out. They'll also have whatever notes that I have written about you, whatever communication that I've had with you. All that stuff will be on file. It'll be kept so that person can then pick up where I left off. So yeah, you end up with just massive amounts of documentation. All those things that you've submitted, all those application materials, all those forms, those are sitting somewhere. They're either saved on a file somewhere, or saved in files somewhere all over the school, or more likely off-site on some kind of server somewhere. In many of the cases as well, though, you're going to have just the physical documentation. So that 10, 15, 20 years from now, however long they keep the records, people can go back and look at the application. Let's say a problem comes up. Let's say 3, 4, 5 years from now, you have an issue, and you need to go back to figure that issue out. Well, people are going to need to go back into the system and pull out your old files, your old documents. Let's say 20 years from now, you need a transcript from the university. Well, how the hell are you going to get that if they don't keep their records, right? So that's the only way that this stuff works. And we can think about corporations too. All the internal documents, all the memos that go out, all the pieces of paper that you have to fill out, all the signatures that you need to get for all these pieces of paper, and so on. That's all part of this management based on written documents. It's very onerous, very burdensome. But from Weber's perspective, it's really, really essential. Otherwise, these things can't. Otherwise, bureaucracies can't work. We're also going to see how this type of thing, this management based on written documents and all the other things that we're talking about, cause massive problems in people's lives, but they're still required to function. So that this is kind of a weird slide, but the feature here is that positions require training. So that seems like a silly thing to point out. Well, don't all positions require training? Doesn't every job in the history of the universe require training? And the answer to that is actually no. Throughout the majority of human history, people did not get their positions based on the training that they had. And we can think about training not just as training, not just as formal training, like I went to school and I got a degree. We can also think in terms of skills. So the essential point here that Weber's making is that now you need to be qualified for the job that you have. And by qualified, that means you have a certain set of skills. So if you're going to be an accountant, you want to be an accountant, you have to be certified to be an accountant. You have to know what accountants do. If you aren't certified, you're not trained, you can't apply for an accountant's job and expect to get it. No one's going to hire you because you don't know what you're doing. But think back to the medieval period when we had kings and dukes and knights and so on. Well, how did you become king? Well, you became king because your father was king and you happened to be the eldest male child. That's what makes you king. That's it. What if you're a shitty king? What if you're the worst king ever? What if you don't know how to administer a kingdom? What if you're a terrible military leader? What if everybody hates you? It doesn't matter. You're the king. You can't get fired. There's no application process. You're just the king. Well, how do you become a medieval peasant farmer? Because you're born into that position. What if you are born into a medieval peasant farming family, but you would make an amazing general, and you would be the best possible general to run the king's army? Too bad, you can't do it. Somebody else is going to do that. Someone who was born into a family that is higher status and has a position that allows him, not going to be him or her, it's going to be him, to be the general of the army, to lead the army. Nowadays, though, we think in terms of merit. You need to have particular qualifications in order to have a job. So training, merit, right, being the best quality worker replaces things like blood, right, so your ancestry, your family history. Things like patronage, so who you know. You're not supposed to get a job based on, in a bureaucratic system, based on who you know. Bureaucracies are supposed to hire and promote the best possible candidate. Again, does that always play out in reality? No, but it always does play out at least to a minimal level, at least in overwhelming majority of cases. So for instance, for an accounting position, you might not get hired if you're the best candidate, but at minimum, there's probably going to be a candidate the candidate that ultimately gets hired is probably going to be at least minimally qualified. You're not going to have someone with no accounting training and has no idea what they're doing to get hired as an accountant, unless something's seriously wrong with the organization. But again, that's very, very different from pre-modern times when it didn't matter what sort of training and skills you had. You just became, you had a job, you had a position, a social position, based on your blood or who you knew. Then we had this other point, again, which seems kind of obvious. It seems like it seems common sense. Of course, official activity should be the worker's focus. When you're at work, we take for granted that you should be focused on work. So over here we have a doctor, and I apologize. I'm looking at stock photos, so I'm on Google image search, and I'm looking for these stock photos. It's virtually impossible to find, or it was impossible for me to find an image of one person at home and one person at work. So these are obviously two different people. But let's imagine this is the guy's home life and this is work life. So again, they're different people, but I couldn't find the same guy in two pictures, or the same person in two pictures. Right now we think of home life and family life as split. So we have our home life, where we're with our kids, family, significant others, friends, just hanging out at home, and that's a different world. We are at home, and then when we are at work, we are at work. We become our position. So this guy, when he is at work, he becomes a doctor. He is no longer who he is as an individual person. He is the doctor, and he relates to patients, and patients don't act like they don't act in terms of their own personalities. They act like patients act. So we become these roles. We take on these roles, we become these roles, we step into them, and that becomes who we are. Our own individual personalities and so on don't really matter. When we leave work, we can become ourselves again. So we, can show our emotions. We can think in terms of our own wants and needs. But that all goes out the window when we get to work. Also, you don't want home, for instance, intruding into work. We've all had that coworker, or maybe we have been that coworker that's constantly getting phone calls from home, or it's constantly bringing stuff or issues from home into work, and that becomes incredibly disruptive to work itself. And you might have coworkers get angry with you. You might have your boss get angry with you. They might be very sympathetic as well. But regardless, the idea is that home undermines work. It makes it harder for you to work, and it's a problem when your home life intrudes into your work life. And we also think the same thing for the reverse. So we think it's a problem when work life intrudes into home life, although I think we're more open to work life intruding into home life than the other way around. But when you're at work, you're supposed to become your job, and you're supposed to leave your outside life at the door to focus entirely on work. There's another implication of that too. It's not just about separating home life and work life. It's also about, and I referenced this a minute ago, so I apologize for kind of jumping around a little bit, but you also essentially turn off your own personality. So a bureaucracy might involve thousands upon thousands of people all working together. And all of those different people are going to have different worldviews, they're going to have different religions, they're going to have different political beliefs, they're going to have different ways of thinking about everything in their lives. But they all have to work together. So when you walk into work, you're expected to essentially turn off your individual religious beliefs, you're expected to turn off your individual political beliefs. You're not supposed to be arguing with people about who you're going to vote for in the presidential election. You shouldn't be advocating for Trump or Bernie Sanders or Clinton, because that could piss people off. And that could get into arguments and fights when you really should be focused on work. You need to be able to work with a person sitting next to you, regardless of your different religious beliefs or political beliefs. All that stuff needs to go out the window. So essentially, your individual personality gets stripped away, and you become a generic version of the position that you have. So if you're a doctor, again, you become the generic doctor. If you work in marketing, you become the generic marketer. So if you imagine somebody from the marketing department, Bob from the marketing department is talking to Jose from the accounting department. It's not Bob having a chat with Jose. It's a generic marketer talking to a generic accountant. And they speak on those terms. So that personal stuff doesn't get in the way of their work relationship. It doesn't get in the way of getting their job done. Now, that is quite a bit different set of circumstances than previous times in human history, where work and home life were not only thought of as separate, but they were tightly integrated. So here we have a picture of a peasant family. This is a painting. And we have a woman here carrying, actually I can't quite tell, it looks like maybe crops or food or something. She's got a water bucket here. She's walking into this structure. You have people over here, men working on making something. You have kids going up into the, barn. I know very little about farms. You have this young woman right here who is either getting the chicken to go where she wants to go, or she's torturing it. I don't know. She's got a stick. Who the hell knows what's going on? You have this guy over here who's sleeping, or who's relaxing, or no, I was playing with a dog, sorry. But anyway, so these are likely all family members, or at minimum, these are people who know each other very well. They're probably family or an extended family. This is their workplace, but it's also their home. So we see a mixture of home-type activities. This guy playing with the dog, these two interacting. They might be working, they might be playing, who knows? But they move seamlessly between doing work-type tasks and doing home-type tasks. They're all integrated. And when they're working out in the fields, for instance, farming or working with the animals, they're working together as a family. Whereas, over here, when you leave to go to work now in contemporary times, you go off to your job, you are leaving your family and entering the world of coworkers. And they're different people, different environments, different situations. But that's not how things used to be. Those worlds used to be tightly integrated. Okay, and I'm actually going to stop here for the first part of this lecture, just because I realized I actually have to go somewhere. I'm going to start another video in a little while, which will pick up from here onward.